It is Tuesday, the 28th of April, 2020. This is David Galchi. Dave Nagel and I welcome you to the 15th talk on business and energy of Forum 2100. First and foremost, we hope that you are keeping safe and are in good health during these challenging times, and we're especially glad that you have found time to join us today. Our guest today is Jan Dash, who will speak to us about his innovative concept of a climate change academy of risk and opportunity. Jan has had a very interesting career evolution. He took his bachelor's from Caltech and then went on to UC Berkeley to get a PhD in theoretical physics. And he initially followed a path of a theoretical physicist. He served as directeur de recherche at the Centre de Physique Théorique in the CNRS in Marseille, France. And then in a significant second phase of his career, Jan established himself as a leader in quantitative finance and risk management. He has held senior management positions in quantitative analytics, risk analytics at Bloomberg, Citigroup, Solomon Smith Barney, and Merrill Lynch. And he's also served as an adjunct professor at the Courant Institute in New York and has been a visiting research scholar at Fordham University. So now here he is in his third phase of his career, where he is applying his considerable expertise to climate change risk. He's the editor of the forthcoming Encyclopedia of Climate Change. And there's so much more to tell you about him. So please go to the Forum 2100 website and read more about this busy man who is definitely on a mission. So quickly, the format of this session is that Jan will talk for 18 minutes, during which you may submit a question at any time. Please use the chat function. Thereafter, we'll have 10 minutes of Q&A as Dave Nagel and I shall do our level best to synthesize the questions for Jan to answer. Then I shall take about 1 minute to close the session and let you know about our next speaker. Jan, you have an audience today that represents China, the Indian subcontinent, the African continent, Europe and the UK, South America, and North America. So we're so happy to have you join us today. Welcome again, Jan. The floor is now yours.
Well, thank you so much, David. And I'm so happy to be able to present to you all on Forum 2100 about climate change risk management and something that I call climate Caro, which I'll explain during the talk. So all of us are now subject to the ravages of COVID-19. I hope you're all well, but COVID-19 will pass, and when it does, the statement that we've all been making for a long time, that climate change demands action and that it's an urgent, very urgent topic will remain. And why is that? Well, we need to avoid the worst climate impacts, leave a livable world for our descendants, and also take opportunities. I like to emphasize that because sometimes it's left out, but it's real. And there are three things that I like to emphasize that are qualities that we need. One is optimism, one is courage, and one is persistence. So there's a new tool that's being created that I hope will be useful. It's the Climate Academy of Risk and Opportunity, and that's what I want to talk about today. But first, what I'd like to do is just review the topic of climate change. Many of you probably know all this, but just to make sure we're on the same page. So the way I see it, climate change is the long-term survival and justice issue that will be here long after COVID. It's a long-term problem. I'm a physicist. I'll just make one statement about physics and science. The science is clear and experts do agree. Humans are causing recent climate change's global warming trend. That means the increase in temperature globally. It's due mainly to burning fossil fuels. And so we need, with all haste, deliberate haste, to transition to renewable energies. And we need lots more risk management action now. So that's the way I like to phrase the topics in terms of risk management. It is a survival issue. We are seeing bad impacts now, but these are just a faint rumbling of what our descendants will see if we do not act substantially. It's also a justice and ethics issue. So the poor and the vulnerable have the smallest effect on climate change, but are hurt the worst by climate change impacts. That's called climate justice. And more humane and cheaper for preventative action now rather than disaster adaptation by our descendants if we don't act now. That's called intergenerational equity. And that's, by the way, mostly why I'm here, is because of my grandchildren. I do want to emphasize that there's no place to hide. So in case you thought this was just something for others to worry about, it's not true. It's going to hit everybody. So it is a human survival issue. So why is that? Well, it's mostly because disasters, which we've always had, are made worse on the average by climate change. We're starting to see the effects now. As I said, they will be much worse if there's little action. And here's a long list of them, and I'm not going to read them. You can see them in front of you, and you've probably seen most of them before. Each one of them is an hour talk, so I can't talk about all of them. I do want to talk about one, which is at the very bottom, which is severe economic and finance disruption and possible breakdown of all of the systems due to effects of climate change. And this is something that people are starting to discuss in detail, especially starting with the Bank of England, which has really been on the forefront of this. Okay, so it's a human survival issue, and there are the reasons. To study what is happening and what will happen, we use scenarios. And so by convention, we take scenarios from now to the year 2100, but you know, 2100 is not so far in the future, actually. There is a Paris Agreement to which all governments subscribed, including the United States, that we have as a goal to limit the temperature increase above pre-industrial levels to 2 degrees centigrade or less. And right now, we are headed toward much higher temperatures than +2 degrees centigrade. And that's a disaster for our descendants. And why is that? It's because of the problems that I've just illustrated. So we need to do better. The good news is that we can mitigate climate change. We really can. And not only that, the climate action leads to the benefits, not only of the avoidance of climate impacts, but opportunities in the new renewable economy. There's a really good resource that's very accessible. It's called Project Drawdown. It's a comprehensive approach to climate action. They talk about really what amounts to a portfolio of actions, 100 actions that can be taken. And it's really important to know there's no silver bullet. We do need to have multiple actions in all sectors with technology that's available now. New technology will help, but we don't actually need it. They have detailed models, both estimates of costs to implement the solutions and the benefits that you get after having done it over a period of time. And the bottom line is that aside from the climate impacts which are avoided, there are huge benefits for climate action. Trillions of dollars are saved above costs. So it's really important to know that. So here is the climate summary, which I like to show, which is 6 key facts about climate change. It's real, it's us, experts agree, it's bad, and there's hope. And there's one more, which is lobbyists deny. That is mainly because there's a huge disinformation campaign that is there to basically obstruct climate action. And I can talk about that if anybody has any questions. So that's the summary. That's what I wanted to say about climate change itself. And now let me turn to the real topic that I want to discuss, which is the Climate Change Academy of Risk and Opportunity, or Climate CARO, as I call it, which is being formed. It's early days. And so this is a kind of an announcement of the Academy. So what is the purpose? Well, we've just talked about it, a survival and moral imperative, a more livable world for us and future generations. And as a practical imperative, the idea is to help businesses step up to the challenge of climate change, assess risk and opportunity, and help guide business decisions. So this is a very strongly business-oriented thing. And why is that? Well, I believe that business is the key to moving the needle on climate action. First of all, we need trillions of dollars for capital investment, and only private capital has the scale to implement that. Governments can set and should set policy and direction, but private capital is going to be needed. Politicians will listen to business. So in this fractured world, when business finally wakes up, as it is starting to do, to the risks and opportunities of climate change, the political scene will move as well. And I believe that there will be a huge business demand for expertise in climate risk and opportunity, and that's what I'm talking about today. So the problem, in more detail, is that business is mostly unprepared, not totally, but as a rule it is, for the acceleration of climate change impacts. Corporate risk management is well developed, but climate change know-how is really nascent, and when it exists, it's kind of siloed. And the corporations, on the whole, again, lack multidisciplinary understanding of climate risk and opportunity. So when I first started on Wall Street, there wasn't any risk management to speak of. There was no quantitative finance. There were no books. There were no seminars. There wasn't anything. And so, you know, we started all of that in the late 80s. And now you can go to a university like Fordham or many others and get a degree in risk management. You can do that. So you can be a risk manager. And I believe that that will be the case for climate change risk management as well. And that's what I want to talk about. So business is waking up to the need for climate change risk management for a variety of reasons, which I can talk about as well. But it's happening, and it's going to become, I believe, very, very strong. By 2025 or earlier, I believe that climate change risk and opportunity expertise will be essential for a competitive need of corporations. So the idea is to suggest a new profession, which I call a climate change risk and opportunity officer. And the idea is to promote viable business environments in the face of increasingly serious climate risks that we just talked about, understand and assess risks and opportunities associated with climate change, and help guide business planning and decision making. So that's the idea. And so the demand will be there. And now what about the supply? Well, what I'm trying to do with this Climate Carol organization is to advocate or be an alarm bell for the development of university master's degree level programs. There are also certificate programs that I'll talk about in a minute, and of course you can have in-house. So what's the idea? The idea is to create next generation programs to build specialized interdisciplinary knowledge in climate change risk management and opportunity. So interdisciplinary is the key, and build and bridge on existing programs in risk management, sustainability, and climate change that exist right now. And then train a workforce with trusted credentials prepared to hit the ground running. So this is the Climate Change Academy of Risk and Opportunity in one slide. So what will it be? The vision is that it will be an independent, nonprofit umbrella consortium of university and corporate partners. So what does that mean? It's basically going to be an advocacy group and an advisory group. And what will it do is advocate for the development of this new profession, climate change risk and opportunity officers and associated workforce, and advocate for high standard guidelines for their training by academic and practitioner organizations using their own curricula and faculty. So it's important to know the Academy does not give courses, will not give courses, it just advocates for others to step up and do the work. And how will it be done? A combination of business demand and university response, and ultimately, I hope, a network of practitioners. There are now networks of risk management professionals and quantitative finance professionals and so forth. So this will be copied, I believe, by climate risk officer and opportunity professionals. So here is a few details, the core professional competencies and suggested curricula. So there are three main core areas: risk management, climate change basics, climate risk and opportunities. So risk management is well developed. Nothing need to be said about it. Corporate finance risk management and quantitative finance risk management is already there. Climate change basics. Here I've listed the titles of the three IPCC reports, and the physical science basis of climate change. You don't need to be a scientist, but you have to know a little bit. Impacts of climate change, vulnerabilities and adaptation, volume 2, and volume 3, mitigation of climate change. So at the level of the technical summaries of these reports, for example. And then climate risk and opportunity, to emphasize finance, economics, and policy. That's the topic of the encyclopedia that David mentioned at the beginning. Models, economic and climate models, financing, the transition to renewable energy economy, scenarios that I talked about, tail risk, uncertainties, there's always uncertainties, but we have to act in the presence of uncertainties, data, crucial topic, tools that are available, and systems. Organizational aspects, the TCFD, which I can talk about if there are questions, Series, which is an investor-led business organization, the United Nations, which sponsors these reports and also conferences, what's available in the academic world, and politically what's going on now, locally and nationally and internationally. Cross-disciplinary communication, very important. And finally, last but not least, intergenerational equity that I've talked about before, and climate justice, or the sustainable development goals, which are extremely important and which round out the climate risk and opportunity section. So three areas: risk management, climate change basics, and climate risk and opportunity. So what's there now? Well, there are university programs in risk, sustainability, and climate, usually in another department, but generally not integrated. There are practitioner certificates. The ACCO has one. GARP will have one starting next month. There are many, many webinars, many resources by many organizations. And so the vision for the Academy infrastructure, I'll just show it briefly. It's going to be a nonprofit with a governance structure and hopefully financed by dues and grants. And there is a proposed ask is to help try to start this thing and become part of the governance structure, help establish this consortium, or even just sign on. So that's it. My 18 minutes is up. So if you want more information, you want to contact me, there is the email. It's climate.caro, don't forget the dot, @gmail.com. So Jan, that's the presentation.
Jan, thanks so much. This is quite interesting. We have some questions for you, as you can imagine. The first one, just a simple one, actually, just clarification. The Paris Agreement calls for holding the temperature increase between pre-industrial times and the turn of the next century to 2 degrees Celsius, if not even 1.5 degrees. So you've said that we're heading toward a much higher point, possibly 3.5 degrees, if not more. How did you reach that conclusion?
So this is a summary basically of all the experts in the field. None of them believe that the Paris Accord targets are going to be met with the present commitments, which are called, which are bottoms up, voluntary commitments by countries. And there's a very useful, tool, and I just like to exhibit it to everybody. It's something that is, can everybody see that? It's something called En-ROADS. Can you see that?
Yes.
Okay, so this is a simulator developed by MIT, and you can see on there that there are many things that you can do and can be done, and so you can play with this yourself with this simulator, move them around, and what you'll see is starting off with these inputs, which are at the bottom of the screen, you'll get an output, which is the temperature change estimate from the simulator in the model, which is thousands of coupled differential equations, technically speaking, is what they are. And so this is probably the best way that you can actually see it yourself.
Okay, very good. Thank you for that. Maybe expanding upon your concept of the climate change risk officers. You're quite familiar with the concept of risk officers. Can you share the essence of current training and certification for risk officers in other fields right now, such as in bank lending or insurance, just so we can kind of calibrate? And to what extent do you think that the training of climate change risk officers, risk and opportunity officers, would be the same?
So I think that there will be a progression and maturation of the field. You know, at the beginning, there weren't any climate change risk officers, and as I mentioned, and there weren't any financial risk officers. Now there are. So it developed over time, and I think this will develop over time as well. I do think that the job requirements that I tried to outline before, what people will basically need to know, is what a business would need to know in order to cope with the risks of climate change and the opportunities. So that's why I said it that way. For other fields, you know, finance risk managers, that's actually part of the training, corporate risk managers. There are actually, so if you look at the certifications that you actually need to get in order to practice in some of these fields, there are tests that you have to pass, and you know, bodies that give the tests. And so ultimately I would suspect that they would be, if that would happen here too, as the field develops. Specifically in terms of insurance, insurance is, you know, has to deal with right now damages due to climate impacts, but it's kind of specialized. And so what I'm talking about is that for the whole of the business enterprise to cope with the risks of climate change and the opportunities, it would be somewhat more broad.
Okay. You have a question here from Christopher Donaldson that actually, I think, hits a point that needs to be clarified. What has, from his question, what has limited businesses from taking substantial action to manage climate risk up until now? And what will be the tipping point for business and government in tackling climate change? And I suppose a corollary to that is, why are you focusing on business and not on government and government policy?
Great questions. Let me try to unpack that a little bit. Let me start with the second part first. So it's important in climate action to use the word and not the word or. We need both action and by private enterprise and government regulation. We do need that. And and why is that? Well, governments help set policies, they help prepare the way, they help certainty develop so that businesses can operate in a way that is you know, beneficial. Regulations are necessary to set guardrails, and the present tendency toward lessening government regulations is negative. It's not a good idea. Hopefully that will be corrected. Government also has the opportunity to sponsor research, fundamental research that private venture capital even won't touch because it's too risky. So that's the government part of it. For businesses, what will set the business community more in motion? Well, many large businesses are, you know, waking up now and actually, you know, have set ambitious goals toward becoming carbon neutral and using, you know, renewable energies and so forth. Business community on the whole in Europe, I would say, is a little bit ahead of the business community in the United States. And what will move the needle, I believe there are three things. The first thing is the impacts of climate change itself. So first of all, physical damage, breaking supply lines, supply chains, and you know, just coping with the impacts of climate change from you know, hurricanes to the other problems that I illustrated before. So that's the first thing. Second thing is the investor community is stepping up. Ceres that I mentioned before is an investor community of real money investors with, I think, 20 or 30 trillion dollars behind it right now. That's pressuring the business community to at least reveal in financial disclosures what their climate risk is as a material risk for investors. That's the second thing that's pressuring them, and the associated TCFD guidelines for reporting financial risk, which will soon, I believe, not become guidelines, but will become regulation. And the third thing is that I believe that it will be contagion. So once you know, somebody in one of the sectors, one of the businesses, ABC, starts to report and act on climate change, then DEF in the same sector is going to say, well, you know, best practices really is to cope with climate change, and so that's, you know, we need to do that. So that would be my response.
I'm just thinking, you probably aren't the first one to be ringing an alarm bell, and I know there are many people who have been doing this. So there's a famous paper by Sokolov and Piccola that was published in Science in 2004, where they articulated, I think it was 15 wedge strategies that were focused on trying to reduce, and they argued that you could reduce or change for the better the accumulation of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. Nothing really seemed to be taken up as a consequence of the publication of that article. There was a sequel in 2011, I think, and nothing again. So are we to say that what you're proposing here with the Climate Change Academy, that you're actually laying out something that's easier to perhaps implement than maybe what Sokolov and Piccola had put together?
So I'm not familiar with a particular article, but I'm trying to really just raise up, you know, something that is something that I believe will happen. In other words, businesses will start to demand these climate change risk officers, and you know, and so when they find, you know, businesses finally wake up, they're going to call the HR department and they're going to say, you know, get me something to deal with climate so that I can report it in my 10K. You know, what the risks are and what are the opportunities to, you know, because we're going to be moving into a new century, which we're in now, and you know, the old ways are behind us. We need to move forward. So get me somebody to help do that. And so that's going to be the demand. And so what is the supply? Well, I'm trying to say that in order to get a supply of people that can really handle the business requirements, that will be there, I believe, and not far off either. This is the response. So it's basically just a kind of foresight as to what I think the business demand is going to be and what the supply needs to be.
Okay, here's a question from Clinton Andrews that I think is sort of a continuation of this stream of discussion. Do you see the profession of climate change risk and opportunity officers as being universal like an MBA, which would mean that it applies to all industries? Or would it be better off to have one for each type of industry? For example, one for real estate, climate change risk and opportunity officer, one for electric utilities, and so forth?
That's a really good question. And what I've illustrated is what I consider the bare bones. So you need to know something about risk management. You need to know something about climate change. You need to know something about the intersection. There are breakdowns which I would like to show just to give an idea. Okay, and can everybody see that?
Yep.
So
good.
underneath each one of these broad topics, there are a number of subtopics. In some sense, they get to what the questioner asked in terms of sector dependent risk management. And I would believe that, you know, for given sectors, you brought up insurance and, you know, other sectors before. There are lots of sectors. And so there are specialized knowledge we need for the individual sectors. My guess would be that somebody, you know, who takes one of these courses, maybe from one of those industries, would get a master's degree and then have the specialized knowledge that they would need in order to apply these considerations. But it's up to the businesses, basically.
Yeah. Jan, thank you so much. I see there are more questions, but we're going to have to respect our time limit. We shall have to close this for now. If anyone has questions or would like to engage Jan in dialogue, you will find his contact information on the FORUM2100 website. That's www.forum2100.org. Jan, we are so grateful to you, and it's been wonderful having you as our guest today. And Dave Nagel and I wish you great success with Climate Tarot. And if we can help, let us know. As always, we shall be posting this recorded session on the FORUM2100 YouTube channel. And you will receive, all of you in the audience will receive an announcement from me in about, well, within 2 days to let you know that it is posted. A link to the recording will also be on the FORUM2100 website. Thank you for joining us today, and please join us for our next talk in the Business and Energy series when we welcome Professor Chris Miller of the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy of Tufts University. Chris will be speaking on the Russian energy sector, challenges and opportunities, and that will take place on Tuesday, the 2nd of June, same time, 11:30 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time, 5:30 p.m. Continental European Time. And please join us and spread the word. Until then, Dave Nagel and I wish you and your loved ones to be safe and in good health and in good spirits too. Thanks again for joining us today. Bye for now.
Thank you.